much easier to prescribe metformin and insulin and take a couple lab tests than it is to do an entire program about low carbohydrate diet and switch over their whole eating structure.
Dr. Robert Lufkin was once a self described product of the medical establishment, with a fruitful career as a professor of medicine. He's published hundreds of scientific papers and has received millions of dollars in government funding. But when he was diagnosed with four seemingly unrelated chronic diseases and told he'd be on medication for life, he started looking elsewhere for answers.
It was through lifestyle changes that I was able to reverse these very serious and potentially fatal diseases and get off all medications for them.
Lufkin is the author of Lies I Taught in Medical School and the Truths That Can Save Your Life. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick.
Well, just a little about my background. I was raised by my parents. My mom was a dietitian, a registered dietitian, so she specialized in nutrition. So growing up, we followed the food pyramid. We religiously avoided saturated fat. We ate low-fat foods. We avoided butter because of the saturated fat, and we substituted margarine with at the time, trans fats and industrial seed oils. We ate a lot of grains and junk foods, which we thought were healthy at the time. And then fast forward, I went to medical school and then eventually entered a career in academics, where I essentially spent my whole career doing that. And everything went fine until about 10 years ago, I was diagnosed with, out of the blue, with 4 chronic diseases that took me completely by surprise. And I went to specialists to educate myself about these diseases and see how to treat them. And they basically prescribed prescription medicines for each one. And they told me the diseases were more or less unrelated. And the prescription medicines would be necessary to not only treat the symptoms, but also to control the underlying disease. And although they recommended lifestyle changes, they said, sure, it's worth improving your lifestyle, but the reality is you're going to be on these drugs for the rest of your life, and lifestyle, doesn't really work for these things. And it basically was a wake-up call for me. So I got my attention very quickly, and I began talking to other experts. I began doing research and understanding about these diseases, and I eventually began to question the things that they taught me. And I looked closely at some of the breakthroughs that have been made in the last few years in our understanding. It changed the way I thought about these diseases. And I realized that a lot of what was being taught about these diseases and metabolic health in general was incorrect, what I've been teaching and what many of my colleagues are still sadly teaching. And when I implemented a program myself with lifestyle changes, I changed some things very radically, as a matter of fact, with my diet, but also sleep and exercise and stress. When I went back to my doctors, they couldn't believe it. They thought the labs were broken. They wanted me to retest the labs. But long story short, what happened was all my labs returned to normal. The diseases were essentially reversed, and I was off all prescription medicines, and that's where I've been ever since then.
What were the diseases?
One was an arthritis, a type of arthritis called gout, which is due to urate crystal deposition. Another was hypertension. I was in good company. Half of adult Americans have hypertension. The third one was diabetes or prediabetes, type 2 diabetes. My blood sugars were abnormally high. And then the third one was dyslipidemia, which was an abnormality of blood fats. So you think about it, arthritis and hypertension, they're not really related, or blood lipids, blood fat, and arthritis. I don't see the association there. But what I came to understand is that these diseases are all fundamentally driven by the same basic mechanisms. And these mechanisms, unfortunately, there's not prescription medicines for them. What works for these diseases to reverse them is lifestyle changes. But the good news is lifestyle is in our control, and we get to make a decision every single day when we wake up. what choices, what we're going to eat, how we're going to exercise, how we're going to live our lives. So it's really empowering that we can take back control of our health doing lifestyle.
But basically, you're saying that you changed your diet and some of your habits, and that's it. And then you went back, and they said these labs can't be right.
That's correct. But out of fairness, my diet, the changes I made in my diet, I was following the standard American diet, the recommended diet, the food pyramid, and I basically turned it upside down. I began doing things like intermittent fasting and fairly aggressive dietary changes, but I've never felt better. I don't consider it a diet now. I consider it the way I live. Being in ketosis, my brain is clearer than it's ever been. I don't want to, eat carbohydrates anymore in the middle of the day or snack all the time. So, but to answer your question, yeah, it was through lifestyle changes that I was able to reverse these very serious and potentially fatal diseases and get off all medications for them. And one of the prime drivers, I believe, in the metabolic disease state that we're all in, and the epidemics of these chronic disease that we're facing in the 2020s had its origin back in the 1960s and 70s when the United States public health got into making policy for nutritional decisions. And basically it was around the mistaken idea that dietary cholesterol and dietary saturated fat drives heart disease. And heart disease was and is the number one killer. So the United States began a food pyramid plan, which emphasized low fat diets and high carbohydrate diets, which is it's basically a junk food diet, and it's a pyramid with carbohydrates and sugars at the bottom and things like fats at the top of the pyramid where you eat less of them. This pyramid became public health policy. All the schools use this for kids.
I remember being taught something like this. I mean, I'm Canadian, but roughly it was the same structure, exactly like you described, especially saturated fats. That was the enemy, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And cholesterol too in eggs. There's,
right.
To this point, and even today, most people, even the conservative orthodox cardiologists will admit that eggs, dietary cholesterol doesn't really affect serum cholesterol, so that those egg white omelets at the restaurants you see, you don't need to eat those anymore. It's probably in my opinion, one of the healthiest things we can eat is an egg. But these dietary changes starting in the 60s and 70s have now swept through society to where we're consuming large amount of junk food, which means a large amount of carbohydrates and refined carbohydrate sugars, a large amount of seed oils, which are industrial oils, which have the benign sounding name of vegetable oils, but there's no vegetables in them. They were originally developed as a lubricant for German U-boats in World War I with Crisco oil, but they're unhealthy, and in my opinion, they drive insulin resistance and drive inflammation. We're now seeped in these things, and on top of that, with the fast food revolution, it's not just what we're eating that's bad, but we're eating all the time. When growing up, we used to eat 3 meals a day, and then basically it became, oh no, eat 6 small meals a day. And my kids at school, they have snacks scheduled into their day between their other ones. And so people are eating all the time. Eating itself drives inflammation. Inflammation is our normal response to food being in our gut. So anytime I eat something, the body normally gets a little inflamed just as a protection of that foreign protein, that foreign material coming into the body. So if you think about it, if you want to improve your diet and you don't want to change what you're eating, you can still improve your health, improve your diet by just not eating all the time. In other words, narrow your eating window, cut out between meal snacks, maybe even skip breakfast, maybe even skip lunch. I mean, I eat 1 meal a day, and I've never felt better. I don't get brain fog in the middle of the day, and I'm in something called ketosis nearly all the time. And I think for me, it's the healthy way to be, and I love it. And ketosis, I mean, if you think about it, human beings evolved over hundreds of thousands of years as primarily hunter-gatherers. And at that point, if you're a hunter-gatherer, you eat when you have a kill, and then you may go for a period of a week or so with fasting, at which point you're in ketosis. And it wasn't until, 12,000 years ago with the agricultural revolution, which Jared Diamond, who wrote Guns, Germs, and Steel, and even Yuval Harari, who wrote Sapiens, both of them famously agree that the worst possible thing that the human beings have done was with the development of agriculture. And you can see why, because agriculture made food available nearly constantly. And that was accelerated, of course, with refrigeration and junk foods. But as food became more and more available, people did not go into ketosis because there wasn't this period of fasting between the hunt and the kill. And the amazing thing about ketosis is, as I researched it more, it doesn't just help diabetes, but ketosis helps cancer. It's a cancer treatment or an adjunct to chemotherapy for patients. In Alzheimer's disease patients, ketosis is, for many of them, helps bring back their memory. So one could argue that ketosis is the natural, healthy state of human beings throughout history until literally the last 12,000 years. And some of the most amazing things about ketosis are in neurodegenerative diseases. You know, we talked a little bit off camera about Guillain-Barré syndrome, and it's seen with Parkinson's disease, and certainly with seizures. Ketosis is fasting, which drives ketosis, is an accepted treatment for seizures 2,000 years ago. There's a whole work about how junk food drives violence in kids. These are correlation studies,
Right.
not controlled prospective studies. So
Sure.
causality can't be inferred, but there's certainly some correlations with people eating junk food and being more angry, being more depressed, being more anxious. So it's really exciting, some of the possibilities that are out there now.
You know, in a way, we've been conditioned to believe that a pill or some kind of medical intervention is what's going to solve our problem. Like we've kind of given away our, responsibility for our health to the doctors, and that is also translated into the use of all sorts of medications, with many of which also interact with each other in negative ways. And people, I've heard incredibly bizarre statistics about how many medications some people take. You just think to yourself, my God, they all have side effects.
Yep.
Right. And the more you take, the more likely one of those things will come up, and some of them are hidden, some of them will come later. We're just like a highly medicalized society.
It's a great point. I think part of it too, as we talked about, if I go to a doctor, I'd much rather have a pill than get a lecture about I need to exercise more and change my diet, because I I used to believe that lifestyle didn't really matter, and what really worked was a pill. And furthermore, I used to believe, and many people still believe, that taking the pill will actually not just treat the symptoms of their disease, but will actually controls the disease and make them healthier. And that's really not true in many, if not most cases. For example, in diabetes, type 2 diabetes, giving the patient insulin and metformin to control the blood sugar spikes doesn't really control the long-term effects of the disease. You still continue to progress on your diabetes. You get your foot amputated, you get your renal failure, you get your blindness, you get your heart attack, you get your Alzheimer's. So I think people aren't aware that in many cases, these pills don't really solve the problem. They just treat the symptoms. And the interesting thing is there's no pill for metabolic disease. There's no pill that you can take that will reverse these things. Metabolic disease is driven by lifestyle, and lifestyle is really the secret to it. In fact, the recommendations of the Nutrition Council, basically that designs the food pyramid, and every few years issues an updated version, continues with the narrative that cereals and grains and carbohydrates should be a significant portion of our diet, with a smaller amount of protein, and then avoiding saturated fats. And one reason is the council that comes up with these recommendations. There was a fascinating paper that came out. There are a number of conflicts from the council from the major food manufacturers who basically benefit from manufacturing junk foods. They sell junk foods that the Food Council then recommends in the food pyramid. And one problem is there's not a lobbying force for lifestyle. There's no lifestyle is free. If I fast during the day, I actually save money because I don't spend it on breakfast or lunch, and I have more time. But there's no lobbying group for that. So we're up against a number of pernicious financial influences that drive the system. Even in the face of knowledge to the contrary, people are still getting the information. Our school lunch programs are still driven by this food pyramid and these food recommendations. The narrative today is such that if anyone handed a 12-year-old child a lit cigarette, everyone would be aghast, and it just wouldn't happen. But someone can hand a 12-year-old child a bowl of sugar cereal and pour chocolate milk on it, and nobody thinks anything of it, when actually it's very damaging to the child, even at that age. And it drives now the incidence of type 2 diabetes in children, which we didn't used to see at all. So changing the narrative is possible, I think, and getting it to the point where, I used to think drinking orange juice was healthy. Most people think orange juice is healthy. You see it on television and movies as, a healthy breakfast, but in my opinion, it's not. It's basically sugar, and it's like eating a candy bar. But changing that narrative so that people think that they instinctively realize what is healthy and what will benefit their lifestyle can have a dramatic effect. It's a big challenge to be able to do that.
Yeah, it feels like the challenge of our time, really, right?
It does, because the chronic diseases that we've been talking about today, the growth in these diseases are unprecedented in our history, and they're frankly not sustainable. Half the adult population is hypertensive. The growth rate in type 2 diabetes is going to approach 50% of the population soon. When that happens, all these chronic diseases are going to explode. And it doesn't have to be that way, because this disease is reversible in most cases, with lifestyle. And Alzheimer's represents, if you think about it, it's sort of the ultimate failure of the medical research establishment. Because for literally decades, there's been unlimited money available to come up with a treatment for Alzheimer's. And to this day, there's no significant pharmaceutical treatment for Alzheimer's that will have any significant effect on the progression of the disease. But we're learning now that things like lifestyle, guys like Dale Bredesen and others, have come up with innovative techniques where they look at Alzheimer's not as a disease of beta amyloid, but actually as a disease of many different things. It may be vitamin D deficiency, it may be a parasitic infection, it may be lead or mercury poisoning, many different factors. But one of the factors is glucose metabolism. It's known that you can diagnose Alzheimer's disease with a PET CT scan, which looks at brain glucose. And low metabolism of brain glucose indicates Alzheimer's disease in certain patients. Well, ketosis, as we've talked about, is an alternate fuel source for the brain beyond glucose. And what happens with Alzheimer's patients when they go into ketosis and they're put on a ketogenic diet is the brain is able to use ketones instead of glucose. And for some, not all of the patients, but many of the patients, they're able to have significant improvements in their memory from these ketogenic diets. And every morning when I get up, I get to choose my lifestyle. I get to make choices about the food I eat, what I put in my mouth, how much I exercise. And it's a choice we get to make every single day to take control of our health and longevity.
Well, Dr. Robert Lufkin, it's such a pleasure to have had you on.